Have you ever lived next to someone so quiet, so private that you barely notice them? Now, imagine one day a strange smell starts leaking from their apartment. A very heavy, sickening stench that only gets worse by the hour. People complain, people knock, people beg, but he won't open the door. Days passed, the flies gathered, the walls feel like they were sweating death. And when the police finally broke in, they didn't just find a corpse lying in the middle of the room. They found the man sitting calmly beside it, watching TV like nothing happened. But here is the part no one saw coming. She may not have just died, she may have been murdered. In the middle of a busy middle-class estate in Ikorodu, Lagos, a mystery unraveled that left the entire community stunned. The kind of story people tell in whispers, always starting with, "Did you ever hear about that man who lived with a corpse?" Tope had just moved into the compound. He was a young, newly employed graduate, quiet but friendly. He lived next door to a man named Mr. Okonkwo, a stern, reclusive man in his late 50s. No one in that compound really knew much about him. His curtains were always drawn. As a matter of fact, he was very quiet and reclusive. He didn't attend community meetings. He paid his rents in full and on time, always. That was all anyone cared to know until the smell started. It began as a faint stench that residents assumed was coming from a nearby gutter or an animal that died in the backyard. But within days, the odor became unbearable. People started holding their noses while passing Mr. Okonkwo's door. Flies buzzed around his windows. Neighbors would knock politely at his door at first, trying to tell him to clean up or check his surroundings. But he wouldn't open the door, even despite all these attempts from neighbors. He just shouted from inside, "Everything is fine, I'm not sick, leave me alone." That was what he would always say. Until one day, Tope, his co-neighbor, found it very strange. The old man hadn't been seen around for nearly a week. No one had heard his voice until the complaint started. So people were wondering what could be going on inside the apartment. Then came a day, the landlord showed up. He had received multiple calls from tenants complaining about the smell. He knocked and knocked, no response. Eventually, he called the police because, of course, he could not break in. It was going to be unlawful. He called the police and they arrived a few hours later, armed with gloves and suspicion. They broke the door open. What they found inside was enough to make grown men cover their mouths and step back. Lying in the center of the small sitting room was a decomposing human body. The body was partially wrapped in a faded bedsheet. It was a woman, middle-aged, swollen, discolored, and stiff. But even more disturbing was Mr. Okonkwo himself. He was sitting just a few feet away in an armchair, watching a muted TV, completely calm. In fact, he looked unbothered. The way it appeared, it was as if the corpse was part of the furniture. So neighbors screamed, some cried, and many ran. So when the police asked who the woman was, Mr. Okonkwo said it was his sister. According to him, she had died 4 days earlier, complaining about chest pain. He didn't have money for burial or for transporting her body to the village, and he didn't want the authorities involved. So what did he do? He simply kept her there in the heat with the windows shut while he continued with his life as usual. So for Tope, he was horrified because he felt this was my neighbor. But as the investigation deepened, things got even stranger because a lot of other things were unraveled. So of course, for police, there were reports. So they had medical reports which showed up that the woman hadn't died 4 days ago. In fact, she had been dead for nearly 2 weeks. 2 whole weeks. And that wasn't even the most disturbing part. There were marks on her neck. There were bruises that suggested strangulation. She didn't just die, she was possibly killed. The neighbors were stunned. They were asking questions like, could Mr. Okonkwo have murdered his own sister? Or if so, why would he want to do that? Under questioning, his story changed multiple times. First, he said she fell. Then he said she died in her sleep. Then he said something no one expected. He said she was already dead when I found her in my room. Now, which one are we going to believe? So when he said she died in his room, that didn't make sense. I mean, how could a woman just die in your room and you never alerted anyone? So the compound descended into chaos. People packed their bags and left. Others staged protests, demanding the landlord to fumigate the entire building and also evict anyone related to Mr. Okonkwo. So another thing is that children that played freely were cautioned by their parents to be extra careful. In fact, in some cases, some children were under padlock and keys. So during their finding, the forensic team found traces of blood under the carpet. It wasn't visible at first, but it was there. When questioned again, Mr. Okonkwo finally said something chilling. He said, "She said to me she was going to die. So she came to me and said, 'Please don't take me to the hospital. Just let me stay here.' So I did." That was according to Mr. Okonkwo. That is, he allowed her to stay there. But you know what? No one believed him. Not after all the bruises that they've seen, not after the silence, not after the flies and the smell. So eventually, he was arrested. No one knows what became of him after that. Some people say he was taken to Yaba Left, the psychiatric hospital. Others believe he was locked up quietly and the story buried by authorities to prevent more fear. But the memory of that incident lingers in that compound. I mean, if it was to be your own compound too, the story is going to linger and the fear will be there. So Tokpe eventually moved out too. He said he couldn't sleep after that night. He kept imagining the body, the smell, and the calmness in Mr. Okonkwo's voice. Then he felt if Mr. Okonkwo could do that to his own sister, how much more him, that was just a neighbor. So you can imagine. I mean, I wouldn't blame him. So you see in Lagos, if you say something, you never really know your neighbor. I don't know if it's the same in other places. But you see, stories like this make you question, do we really ever want to know our neighbors? Now, over to you. What would you do if you found out that your neighbor was living with a corpse? Would you ever feel safe again in that same compound? Or would you also leave, just like Tolu and many other neighbors? Let's talk in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. So, if this story gave you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe or follow for more gripping real life stories on That Real Story. Until next time I come your way, stay blessed, stay safe, and most importantly, always remember to be nice to people. Take care and God bless. Peace out. Bye for now.